Hello everyone, this is Malik and on behalf of Varnish Software and 451 Research, which is now a part of S&P Global Market Intelligence, I would like to welcome you all and say thank you for attending today's webinar titled Poor Website Performance Can Negatively Impact the Bottom Line. Prepare your site now for the busy holiday season. Just a few quick housekeeping items before we get started. To ask a question, simply type it in the question box on your screen. We will get to as many as we can during the Q&A session. The presentation slides are available for download in the resource section in the console. And finally, the on-demand version of this webinar will be available shortly after the live event concludes. Leading off today's discussion will be Cheryl Kingston, who is Research Director, Consumer Experience and Commerce at 451 Research. Joining Cheryl, we have Adrian J. Herrera, who is Chief Marketing Officer at Varnish Software. We welcome our speakers today, and with that, I'll turn it over to Cheryl to kick off this event.
Thank you, and I do welcome everyone to today's topic. We're really looking forward to bringing together more forward-thinking information about how you can plan for your upcoming holidays, also taking a look at the role that technology can play to improve the overall customer experience. And it isn't just me today. Gladly, we're able to collaborate with Adrian. So Adrian, welcome today. And you're going to see more of an integrated approach of how my research around the customer experience and information in the upcoming holiday season and a lot of what businesses are trying to do to improve their overall customer experience, along with Adrian's point of view of how Varnish can really play a role in the underlying way of improving the performance. And so, Adrian, why don't you kick it off and give a little bit more context to that topic?
Sure. Yeah, first of all, thank you for having me. Thanks, Malik. Thanks, Cheryl. I think we have a lot of great information to share, and we're going to focus more on the business side of things. So really good information and market data from Cheryl, but we're also going to be sharing how infrastructure and underlying technology can really help improve some of those metrics. And we use the term bottom line for a reason, because there is this front-end experience where, of course, you can increase sales or achieve your goals, whatever they may be faster. But there's also an opportunity for optimization of costs, optimization of resources. And that's what we'll be going over today.
Yeah, and optimizing that digital experience is absolutely critically essential. I mean, you see major brands here, especially as we're coming up to the holidays. I'm a huge Nikon user, so I really want to understand what everyone's trying to do to improve my experience from that standpoint, though my husband would prefer I wouldn't be able to buy things that much faster. But it is what it is, and I will get into it because it really is all about connecting with our customers. And I talked about emotion as the currency of experience long before COVID, and now all of a sudden my colleagues are now coming on, and everyone's coming around and saying how experience is like the ultimate game changer. And I'm like, yeah, really? Of course it is. And so it really did intensify, but the reality is this is what we are facing today. And so experience, not price, will really be the battleground of the future. And so what businesses are trying to do is really harness that connection. They're trying to improve that overall digital experience, and they're really trying to make these memorable experiences. And so that's why I talk about emotion as the currency of the experience. And by the way, as it relates to Nikon and that picture, this is actually my background and my picture that I took in Iceland, and that person in the background, which you really can't see because my designers overlaid it, is my daughter. So it really is about bringing the connection there. But Adrian, you do talk a lot about how you're really improving these experiences for your customers.
That's true. That's true. I really like your approach here because, you know, it talks about emotion. And when you look at emotion, there are both positive and negative emotions and positive and negative experiences. And I think what we see from a digital perspective is that the negative experiences far outweigh the impact of the positive ones. So if a customer has a bad experience, a negative experience in interacting with one of your properties, whatever that may be, they may just never come back. And that is a huge risk. So when we talk to customers, we really try to focus on helping them achieve their goals and helping whatever they're doing online in the digital world remain online and be accessible. And we'll talk about some of that coming up here in the webinar.
Yeah. Absolutely, because those friction points is something that we're going to address. And the fact that we actually can put dollars to it is critically important. Because when you do take a look at the pain points and customer expectations and the friction points, everyone is facing rising customer expectations. This has been happening for a while now, but our sensitivities to time are becoming astronomically more important. And the fact that we've got 86% rise of customer expectations, if you really see and add up the little green there, that's huge, right? So we've been facing this for a while, and we're going to continue to face it. And now as we head into a lot of economic uncertainty, we're going to focus on what the businesses needs to make sure that we can meet these customer expectations and make sure that we are driving a lot of the needs for moving forward so that we can start reducing some of those customer friction points. Because as businesses really focus on what they're trying to do today, the reality is it is about growing revenue from existing customers. So as Adrian said, if you've got them on their website and you're annoying them and you're creating a friction point, you're not going to not only convert that, but they're not going to come back. So you're going to inhibit your ability to grow revenues from existing customers. You're going to inhibit your ability to service them, right? So that's where a lot of the top line objectives are. It isn't just about marketing acquisition anymore. On the left-hand side, the other thing I want to point out is we do a lot of research as it relates to digitally driven organizations and digitally delayed. And I'll go through that in a little bit more detail later. But it's a gap, and it's about way businesses that are really investing in technology are leapfrogging some of their competitors. And here you can see it just on the overall business dynamics. So things like understanding customer metric points. You have to understand if you're eroding that customer experience, your NPS scores are going to go down, your customer satisfaction score is going to go down, it's going to impede your operations. And that will also impede a lot of the advocacy and loyalty costs from that's not loyalty costs, but brand advocates of where it's really trying to go. So when we do look at a lot of these questions here, we do understand that it is about the holiday shopping season, right? So that's what we're here to talk about today. So what I want to do is just take one more step back. And as we are taking a look at how to prepare for this upcoming shopping season, let's take a look at reality of, you think it's far off? We're dealing with this right now. Shoppers, even in this recession today, are already trying to take into account and plan for where they're going in the upcoming holidays. So 30% has probably already started in the upcoming weeks leading to Black Friday, after Black Friday, and again, you get the spike right in the middle. So what are we doing to make sure we have peak performance now? What are we going to do to make sure that everyone's leading up to Black Friday and Cyber Monday? And then what are we doing to make sure that continues on throughout the holiday season and into planning for 2023? One of the other things I want to point out is we've got this shift to digital. So yes, we've got online and in-store here. And even in-store, we're starting to see a lot of digital experience crossover. So it's really in an omni-channel world. But as it relates to online, we have to understand what's going on with the browser, the mobile app, the web browser itself on the mobile phone. So the whole mobile aspects can't be forgotten. So in this omni-channel world, we really do have to understand how to bring it all together. And Adrian, even in a brick and mortar locations and remote branches, we are starting to see the role of digital playing a much broader role in mobile for these traditional brick and mortar stores.
Yeah, absolutely. I think what we're seeing is this notion of the digital experience. Everyone always thinks it's online, but now that a good portion of traffic and a good portion of shopping is done from a mobile UI, people are actually interacting with digital content while they're in brick and mortar or when they're in other locations. And it's really a challenge for those who need to ensure a very responsive customer experience, regardless of where the users are. And what we're seeing is there is a lot of kind of technical debt out there, and we're going to go into this in a bit, but things are just moving at a very fast pace. And of course, a negative experience on mobile relates, just really tarnishes your brand, and it really affects that experience and that, your reputation online, when the user does interact with you on the website or wherever your other shop or the interaction points are.
Yeah, and the consumer doesn't understand all these friction points. And the reality is we've monetized this. It's just a snippet. This isn't even everything. So when we just took a look at some of these experiences, when we take a look at some of these shopping messages, $305 billion opportunity. The divide is really taking a look at digitally demanding versus ones that aren't. But when you add it up, it really is a $305 billion opportunity. And we've been tracking this for a while. So the fact that we're able to understand that 90% of these respondents say they would no longer interact with a brand or a retailer again is what's going to drive some of these revenue figures. The fact that they could be abandoning a shopping cart because they can't find what they're looking for, or the fact that the information that they're looking at won't load, the content's not specifically there. Now think about where we're going with video and a lot of these immersive contexts. That's where we really have to understand the elements that's driving what I call context and convenience as we relate to this ideal customer experience. And the revenue lift that we have can be essential, because if you get it right, our data shows that consumers will actually put more into their shopping cart. So when we cross-sell quickly a piece of product or image or information that is relevant to them, and we can do that very effectively, they are going to put it into their shopping cart. So we did see specific increases in the ability to quickly personalize the information that it had to a broader wallet share. So all of this is what adds up to a bigger point of view as it relates to this on-demand ability to understand and reduce and capitalize on these friction points. And that's where we tie some of the survey data to something called a Unified Global Commerce Forecast, where we're really taking a look at the revenue opportunities across all these different ways to optimize that customer experience. And Adrian, you can bring into account some of this as we move forward too with some of these revenue opportunities, correct?
Yeah, correct. I just want to do a quick check, Cheryl, on what slide we're on. I'm getting a little bit of lag, so I want to make sure I'm talking to the right slide.
I was just going to move it over to some of the revenue opportunities that we missed. And so if you see something, you got it? Did it refresh? And so refresh. Yeah. Perfect. Because one of the things I wanted to go over was the fact that, some of the data and the revenue misses that we were really looking at was the 44% of people that they abandoned the shopping cart, and the search capabilities, and the fact that they weren't able to have the inability of their personal preferences. And so I know that you've really worked with some of your clients to address some of these issues.
Yeah, absolutely. And this dynamic data is very hard to persist. Once users set up their cart, once they set up their preferences, and then maybe they get distracted or they go shop somewhere else and they close that window, and it's up to a lot of these organizations to persist this data, a lot of our customers to persist this data. It's difficult to do. We actually call it caching the uncacheable, this dynamic data that is a challenge to persist over a relatively short period of time, over half an hour, a few days. And we've worked with a lot of customers to help them do that, to cache this dynamic data, make it continually available, so that personalization experience is there when the consumer comes back and when it is right for them to make the purchase.
Yeah, absolutely. Because as we talked about, time is of the essence. And when you're really trying to search for something, it really comes up as a huge friction point. And then if you add the opportunity, it really comes down to the opportunity lost and opportunity cost. And so that's why when I like to take a look at it as it relates to what we can do across that digital commerce experience and get through some of this pervasive friction. Because if you look at the technology friction today and you look at where we are with things like the poor performance that Adrian and I talked about earlier, static content, old content, wrong content, outdated content. Now we also take a look at reliability failures, like what happens when the site's down or all of a sudden it's just not refreshing fast enough. All of this is technology friction that's actually leading to productivity friction. So it really does impede your employee morale. So while, customers are annoyed, think about what it does to the employees with all the manual errors and poor collaboration. We work really hard to improve the customer experience. We want to make sure that our customers are getting the right experience because that's what we're here to do. And so it does bring down the employee experience also. And then on top of it, it leads to weak execution across the board. So you won't have any differentiation. You'll have limited business agility because you can't personalize. And the low customer engagement will really pour out. We cannot say that enough, which will then carry through strategic debt. Lack of leadership impaired and stifled innovation. And so while these are all top-line business problems, there's a way to then turn this into an opportunities and ways to fix this. So, Adrian, taking a look at this and then bring out more of like how we can fix some of these issues.
Sure, and I think the point to get across is this is like an ecosystem, right? This isn't like a progression that happens kind of in series. These things are all affecting each other, and it's a pretty complex system. And from a technological perspective, what we see at Varnish and what we help people with, one of the biggest things and one of why we are so well known in the industry, and that one of those opening slides kind of covered how many sites we enable, is, from a cache perspective, we just make everything a lot faster. So if you're struggling with cache misses, a lot of times the way that organizations see this is, there's increasing costs in their CDN, in their content delivery solution, or their origin servers are overwhelmed. A lot of retail and e-commerce organizations experience this during the holiday season. There's a sale. A lot of people try to access that page, and the origin servers just get overwhelmed. So that's what we mean by technology friction, and that's one of these examples of pervasive friction. But we also see, outdated data being an issue. If there is, what do you do when you want to change a price or change a product description or change the video that demonstrates a product and make sure that that gets propagated globally, not just globally, on the web, but also to your web UI, another point of technology friction. And then moving on to productivity friction, a lot of people just think about the front end and what customers see. But there's a lot of opportunity to optimize the back end. It's not just optimizing infrastructure like faster servers and increasing your speed. There's a lot of processes that can be optimized, like database querying. We actually enable one of the largest streaming organizations in the world to optimize the way that their developers check in code and check out code. Their operations are so massive that if we're able to improve that by fractions of a second, then it really impacts their overall productivity, and it impacts it in a very positive way. And from a weak execution perspective, obviously, if your systems, both external and internal, aren't moving fast enough, then it's going to impact the way the rest of the world sees your website, sees your brand online. And the way we see that coming out is, low Google Lighthouse scores, or poor SEO ranking, or very slow page load times. And sometimes it even leads to misalignment of business units, because one business unit may be in charge of customer experience and the other business unit may be in charge of infrastructure. And the customer experience unit is saying, hey, we're seeing this long lag time. And of course, the infrastructure team, may not think it's their issue. And sometimes there is, this misalignment. We see that a lot, not just between the business side and the tech side. We're seeing that a lot even on the tech side, just between different business units on the tech side, your content delivery side, your application side, and your infrastructure side. For larger organizations, we're seeing that amount of friction and everyone's kind of pointing the fingers, and it's very hard to get to the bottom line. How do you fix these issues? Where do you even start? We do help organizations with that too. And this, of course, leads to strategic debt. Organizations who are successful do have technology out there. They have put applications out, or you have web pages, sometimes millions of web pages, and those web pages have millions of objects on them, millions of images, millions of videos. And you quickly start to get into this world where you're managing billions of files, you're managing legacy applications. No one ever updates their application when they should. So you do have that strategic debt out there, not only from an online and web perspective, but also what we're seeing more often than not now is the mobile perspective. Organizations are really struggling with optimizing mobile. So these are all things that we have helped organizations with, and they're just examples of the pervasive friction that you pointed out, Cheryl.
Yeah. And, you're going to go through examples here, but I just want to point out that all those things are really can be reduced with better approaches to technology, reducing manual processes, and just connecting the whole organization to operate as one voice through the customer. And that's
Absolutely.
how you get results.
That is how you get results. And here are some of the results that we've helped others achieve. So we spoke about Core Web Vitals and Lighthouse Score. So performance engineers, those who are in charge of customer experience, Lighthouse Score, Google Lighthouse Score should be, very familiar to you. But we have reduced page load times by 83%. We have use cases for all of these on our website. We'll point them out. I didn't want to go into too much detail here and go over each one of these, but if you are interested, we do have some great resources that go over these metrics. But an 83% page load reduction. So taking it from seconds to milliseconds. A 12x decrease in backend server load. So, for some of those origin storage use cases where origin servers were just getting overwhelmed, there was actually downtime. We were able to come in and decrease the backend load for those origin servers and keep those organizations up. 100% uptime is what we've achieved with other customers. We've been able to do a lot more or optimize the backend infrastructure on a lot less servers. So 10 times more traffic handled without outing servers, 60% more organic traffic in a very short period of time. So, what we have helped with are things that can be deployed quickly. Sometimes there is complexity. It takes more time, but there are other ways where we can come in and immediately help with some of these metrics. And of course, 50% reduction in egress fees. Anyone who has used either AWS or Google Cloud or Azure or commercial CDN out there knows the term egress. And when you have to go out and you have to get something from the origin, it really costs a lot. So we have been able to come in and immediately help reduce those egress fees and calling back to the origin server. So again, these are just very quantifiable ways that we have helped organizations, not just on the retail side, but also the financial services sector. And we have caches up in space on satellites, and we actually have them running out in the ocean on cruise lines. So anywhere you really need to optimize consumer experience, even if bandwidth connectivity is low or there may be no bandwidth connectivity and you have this closed network, we can come in and help.
Absolutely.
That leads us to the next slide. Yeah.
It does. It does. And so everyone's sitting there thinking, well, so what does this mean? Like, how do I pull this all together? And you're pulling it all together because to remain relevant in the eyes of your consumers, we need to solve this problem. We need to make sure that we're investing in contextual experience at every step of that customer journey. And so that's why it's so pivotal to do this at the point of the shopping journey, at the point of conversion. And so as the shopper transforms and we wind up looking across that entire journey from engagement to interaction to conversion to then servicing again, and you want to make sure that you're able to be responsive, make sure that the information is relevant. That's where all of this comes together. So it's about the performance. It's about bringing the data together. It's about understanding that omniscient, multi-channel view of that customer. And then with the advent of all the different types of devices, it just adds more complexity to the overall customer experience. And then if we take that step further and make that experience much more immersive and interactive, it's only going to increase that complexity. And so if we look again towards that upcoming holiday area, these immersive experience requires a lot more content optimization, a lot more performance optimization. So you can't just say, well, you've got your product reviews and ratings, right? So you think, well, that's just the product reviews people. That's just someone coming in and putting in reviews, and we just have to make that more transparent. Well, no, because you've got to bring that in. You've got to make sure that it's optimized. You want to make sure that it's searchable. You want to make sure that it's engaging and it goes through, and the performance on those are so critical. Then if you look down one more level and we take a look at detailed product information specs, that's not just text, right? That's not just caching a little bit of data. What happens if those are really immersive as it relates to images and pictures and the content that that's doing? What if it's pulling in content from multiple different inventory systems for specs across multiple different back-end systems? Again, critical. So these are requirements from your customers that aren't as simple as everyone can figure. When we talk about a convenient shopping experience online and offline as one of the top three, again, what are we doing to understand what that means between mobile and the web and doing a more of a multimodal approach? And so this is where we take a look at all the different areas that we have to optimize. And I'm going to state again that 9 out of 10 consumers really are going to require this ideal experience. And what happens if you're really not delivering it? So why don't you do this, Adrian? I mean, it really doesn't, try to understand how the infrastructure impedes this or helps this customer experience on these immersive experience side.
Yeah, and I think what we hear a lot from customers is the reason they're not doing it is because they've already been doing something a certain way. And I think we see that. And for professionals in the space, maybe it's not a surprise, but I think for others, they would be surprised at what some of these hyperscale organizations, what they're relying on a daily basis, what had got them to a certain spot, and the inflexibility of a lot of their original decisions. And I think that's what really impacts people the most. They do have this legacy approach. They have legacy applications. They have certain skill sets in-house. And I think what they need to do is look at technologies that help them achieve their goals without necessarily needing to rip and replace what they're currently doing. These supplemental technologies that can help them achieve their goals act as these layers, and Varnish is certainly one of those layers, but absolutely, it's very complex. There's a lot of moving pieces, and I think that's why a lot of organizations, they see this data, but a lot of times they just don't know where to start. So that is a big issue, and I think boiling this all down, you just need to remain current. And that's a challenge these days with all the different data silos and UIs that you have and different ways your customers can experience it. You just need to stay current.
And you have to stay current because the pace of change is only going to accelerate. And so the one thing that hasn't changed, the one thing that has accelerated is the data, the technology, the process really needs to rise to meet those changing customer expectations that we decided before, right? So considering that the market is still formulating a lot of their ways to approach this, and we're a little bit behind as it relates to some companies are really ahead on digital transformation and some companies are not, and we're going to go through some of that in the next upcoming slides, but it's a reshuffling of the proverbial deck to make sure that we're implementing technologies that are really going to improve and secure that loyalty and revenue. And I want to jump forward a little bit, Adrian, because you were really doubling down a little bit on the legacy technology and where that's going. And I want to support you on that, right? Because one thing that you just said is the pressure for growth requires monetization. And here's the proof point. Here's the data. So when I pull across what's going on with where businesses are really being inhibited today, these are your top four. So a lot of businesses are really concerned about data security. And so they get into this, oh my God, I got to focus all on security, and they do absolutely nothing about the legacy systems that they're trying to address. They're like, what do we do with all this legacy IT? And then they're saying, oh my God, so I've got data security and I've got issues with legacy IT, but I've got all this competition from retailers and marketplaces. I gotta fix this. I gotta get my pretty website out. I gotta get my product mix. I've got to get all of this to the consumer, and I've got to manage all the customer data. The problem is they're doing these in silos. They're like, okay, security team, go at it. Legacy IT team, okay, don't spend too much money. Competition, that's the market team, right? Managing the data, that's data science. But the reality is this all has to come together. Don't you think, Adrian? Especially for security and IT. I mean, yes.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, Varnish, we only help with a small, portion of these, but we do help with all of these. And there's a lot of coordination between business units, and everyone has their own strategies and objectives, and it is very challenging, but you hit it on the head. I mean, all progress in all of these are required to really achieve that modernization and to move a lot faster. It's just not, seconds aren't good enough anymore. We're talking milliseconds and, sub, 1 millisecond kind of response times that you're going to need to enable some of the higher quality video, higher quality data that's coming out. So if you don't really lay the foundation now or set the stage on how to really streamline your operations, you're going to be feeling it here in the next, certainly in the next few years.
Yeah, and that millisecond isn't just about optimizing that piece of content. It's about personalizing and making sure that piece of content is the right piece of content and contextually relevant. So it means bringing all of this together with IT, customer data, and doing it in a very differentiated approach. And this is why we talk about the growth of digital transformation, right? So in 2016, only roughly a third of businesses really had these formal strategies. Well, you fast forward to today, and you get 47% are really addressing digital transformation. It's real, it's happening, and every business is becoming a digital business. And you really have to focus on holistically what's going on with innovative products and services, changes in business models, continuous improvement of those business operations is what we were talking about heavily today, and also personalizing these experiences for customers, employees, and your partners. And this is where I develop a little bit more about digitally driven organizations. And what that means is you take your companies that have formal strategies for digital transformation and combine that with companies that are early adopters of technology. They really are using technology as a strategic differentiator. That's where you get your digitally driven organizations, and everyone else is pretty much digitally delayed. And why that matters is because we track the results that these organizations are seeing. And so there is a correlation between digitally driven organizations and their emphasis on customer experience, along with their returns on equity and credit performance. So this is some groundbreaking research we did to try to prove, is this really important in the end of the day, or is it just companies that are putting lip service to it? And companies that are using digitization as a way of focusing on and adapting to their customers' needs have a clear advantage standpoint. Now, these are public companies because that's what we can measure. But I can tell you right now that it's not just public companies that are under pressure here. It's small businesses, it's medium businesses, private businesses. And when you focus on the customer and understand how they're taking a look and using technology to transform their business in a long-term relationship to build that brand loyalty, that's where you're going to see the results. And here you're seeing roughly 3 times more successful. 2.7 times is how you read this. And why are these businesses succeeding? Because from a business standpoint, they're putting CX at the heart of what they do from a digital transformation standpoint. And so over the years, I can go back around 3 or 4 years where businesses that were digitally driven actually had a 30-point differential for improving the customer experience, and digitally delayed were really behind. So they're closing the gap. But where we're now seeing the gap has to do with the ability to innovate, where you're using the volume of data growth and new business models as your complete competitive advantage. And so when we do look at this, Adrian, your customers really are putting the customer experience at the heart of their digital transformation projects, for some of this.
Yeah, they absolutely are. I mean, we deal with some of the biggest service providers in the world, and they do act like service providers. They're not stuck in some of the old ways that some organizations have to deal with today. But it's all about making sure everything is responsive. Making sure again that you can support those dynamic use cases and new emerging use cases. I mean, at the end of the day, I think it really comes down to the customer and consumer. I thought your progression was really interesting to see the growth, because now the customer, the consumer, they have a forum to complain about you. If you don't do something right, you're going to quickly know about it externally. And that's how a lot of people make their decisions now. They see the star rating, or they go take a look at your reviews. And if you start moving down in that review, or you drop from 4.5 stars to 4 stars, it's really difficult to get back up there. So there's a lot of things going on. As you mentioned, Cheryl, the pace of change is increasing. So again, this is a challenge, but there are ways that you can improve on a lot of these without needing to completely change what you're doing today. They're very complemented, supplemented, not just from Varnish, but other technologies out there too.
Yeah, absolutely. I just want to point out one other thing on this chart. If you look down at 3 from the bottom, reducing costs through operational efficiencies, right?
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah.
In this upcoming era of trying to do more with less, we do see that Digitally Delayed are putting a lot more emphasis on reducing costs through operational efficiencies. Now, there is going to be a balance here, right? There's ways to make sure that you're doing both and not just overemphasizing the ability to reduce cost and putting behind your efficiencies to do it. So I guess my point being is the requirement is to really have this well-planned approach between what line of business is trying to do and what IT innovation can do. And so that we're investing in these new tactics to remain relevant in the eyes of our customers, but doing it in a balanced approach, right? So we can't just spend for spend's sake anymore. That's gone, right? So now it is focusing on delivering on some of this innovation while also reducing some of the costs. And why this is so important is because if we look to the future of what these digitally driven organizations are doing, is they are focusing on the ability to deliver personalized customer experiences for their customers. So this is how you read it. 73% of these digitally driven organizations are really prioritizing these digital experiences, which means they're investing in performance optimization. They're understanding the role of content in immersive experiences. They're using data in real time, in milliseconds, to really create these differentiated experiences. And look at the difference on their ability to execute and compare themselves to their peers. So these digitally driven organizations have a 90%, they rate themselves much more effective at creating these new experiences. Everyone is going to be a little bit behind as we then look forward to some of these new transformational experiences, thinking about Web3 and where these next generation experiences to go. And my only point here is if we can't even handle the experiences today with the content and the data and overlaying some of the legacy IT that we have and really bringing together business with IT together to optimize the performance of the entire business, then there's no way you're going to transition to some of these really immersive experiences, such as the metaverse and some of these more digitally driven experiences that these organizations are already looking at how to embrace for the future. And so we really need to take a step forward and look at some of these ways to optimize performance in a digital world, understanding how to put the customer at the center, but also at the same time, improve your operations. And Adrian, there's a lot that you can do here with these impacts. And why don't we restate the bottom line that you can get? Because as I said, you got to do both. You got to focus on revenue growth, but also bottom line improvements.
Yeah, absolutely. And the bottom line, I mean, you subtract your costs from overall sales and revenue. And And that is, there's this element of you need to sell more. You also need to do more with what you have, with your budget. I like when you said you can't really just spend your way out of this anymore. I mean, the growth that we're experiencing now just across the board in all different markets, needs to be supported by roughly the same budget. Budgets are not increasing at the rate of growth, at the pace of change. And you did hit it on the head with the following slide, the previous slide. What's coming from an edge perspective, from a 5G perspective, metaverse, we think things are moving fast now while we're quickly moving into a world where everything is connected. And we're struggling with supporting, the mobile phone. Well, what happens when you can purchase stuff from your car, from your refrigerator, from your oven, right? It sounds kind of weird to say, but it's coming. It's coming. I think we see elements of that. Even my printer now orders ink for me when it starts to run low. And, these are the things that it's just happening. And the scale and the investment that other organizations, a lot of competitive organizations, the viewers of this podcast or this webinar are experiencing, these organizations have figured it out. They are moving much more like a service organization. We deal with a lot of them just on our day-to-day, but these are some of the improvements that we were able to deliver to them. The question that I'd like to leave you with at least is, how would these improvements impact your business, impact your bottom line?
And page load times is incredible. A lot of these back-end server loads, it really comes down to optimizing the performance. And if you do what you always did, you will get what you always got. And I think a lot of companies are always trying to move forward, especially, as we said, in the pace of change. So what I would love to do at this point is bring it back to Malik to go over some of the questions we have from the audience.
Thanks, Cheryl.
Because it is Q&A time.
It is.
So it's time for our Q&A session. Just a quick reminder, everybody, if you have a question, simply type it in the question box on your screen. We will get to as many as we can. The first question I have is, I use Akamai and Amazon AWS. How does Varnish integrate with them?
Yeah, I believe that's Akamai. So we do have a plugin for Akamai, and we do integrate directly with commercial CDN solutions out there. And from an AWS, from a cloud perspective, our software, we mentioned kind of content delivery, streaming, and caching software in one of the opening slides. You can really run that wherever you need it, whether that's within your data center, whether that is on other infrastructure like on AWS, or whether that's some sort of hybrid approach. And we do even offer a managed service. So that's how we would integrate with those services, with those solutions.
Thanks, Adrian. The next question I have is, do you see any changes in the behaviors now that COVID restrictions have lifted?
Yeah, so there's been a lot of hype around this. So there's been back and forth. Shopify talked about how everything's going to go digital commerce. It really isn't about restrictions have lifted, because we've been out of some of these lifted for a while now, especially in the US and in some of the other countries. And we questioned whether that consumers would go back to their old behaviors, and would digital then take a back seat, because we can then shop in stores. But the reality is we are seeing a lot of consumers go back to in-store shopping. Fine, that's great, right? Because there was some pent-up demand there. But we will see a balance. We have a lot of consumers learned during the last couple of years that digital is convenient. And in the end, it is going to be blended. So it isn't really about the in-store versus the online digital experience. It isn't just about the mobile versus the in-store. One of the things that Adrian pointed out is that it is everywhere. So what are we doing to make sure everything is optimized no matter where your customer is, whether they're in-store, whether they've picked up their phone, whether they're sitting at their desk or their tablet? That's what's most important. So yes, some consumers have gone back to in-store, And digital has taken a little bit of a black eye over the last couple of months as people are starting to see that it isn't continuing this massive, fast-paced growth that we thought we predicted, but it's still on a growth path, right? So taking a look at going from 4% to 5% is still really important. So while it went from 4% to 11% of overall and then back to 6%, it's moving forward. That's still a 25% back to normal increased pace. And that's not even capturing the fact that these consumers might not be transacting only, but they are buying and then going in store and looking. They're doing a lot on this today, even while they're in a physical environment.
Yeah, absolutely. And to add to that, we do have a lot of visibility into what's going on, again, with some of the largest brands in the world and some of the largest service providers in the world. And we're seeing this, they're really challenged with handling live events and live streams. How do you scale to support those live events? And that's just not from a streaming perspective, but it's also from a commerce perspective, right? You have tens of thousands to hundreds of thousands of people hitting a specific location, buying a lot of things, all using their devices at once, and then they go away, right? They go home. So how do you handle these bursty spikes in traffic just across the board? And I think, some of the largest brands in the world, they're starting to figure that out. They are figuring that out. And that's what we're seeing a lot exiting the pandemic, the need for these live events and really the popularity increasing for them.
That's a really good point. Yeah. I thought about that part.
Yeah.
What's next?
The next question I have is, how long does it take to add Varnish to my operations?
Okay, yeah. As I said, we do have software based, so it's really easy to deploy, but we also have a managed service. So in one of those use cases that I shared, the quantifiable metrics, it was actually for a soccer team. I won't tell you where they are because we can't use their name publicly. But we were able to come in and stand up a solution within a day through our managed service department. So we do have managed services too. So it really depends on what you're trying to achieve, what your goals are. Some are really fast. Some are very complex, take months, sometimes a little bit longer, depending on how complex we're trying to get and what we're trying to achieve. But it can be pretty quick in improvements in some of those quantifiable metrics I shared.
Thanks, Adrian. I have another question. The question is, does this change anything as we move towards the metaverse and Web3?
Well, so here's the thing. We don't really know exactly what's coming and the architectures that's going to be out. It's still in its infancy stage. However, one of the things we are tracking is the fact that it is immersive, right? You are doing a lot of AR and VR, right? Adrian, that requires a lot of bandwidth, doesn't it? I mean, it's going to have a huge impact of what we're trying to plan on from the performance standpoint. So that's
absolutely.
where I think it does change. Absolutely.
It's just not if you take a look at the data, the actual physical data that needs to be transferred, compared to just your regular, HD video, you're talking, 4 to 10 times the amount of data for video. And then you're taking a look at what is actually happening in the metaverse, all of the transactions, all digital transactions that are going on, and then all of the new points of consumption with your headsets, and you have these different sites around the world. So it is, the world, it's already complex, and we spoke about the rate of change, but we've already started to shift that way. So again, we talk about customer experience, and right today, the metaverse, it is relatively a lagging experience, but it's going to get a lot faster, a lot better. Just innovation is happening at a faster pace. So what we talk about now, it's already happening, right? The largest brands are already selling in the metaverse. People they're selling real estate, in the metaverse, and it's a trend that's been increasing, and it's just going to continue to increase when you have ubiquitous, high quality bandwidth and connectivity really around the world, and it's coming.
Thanks, guys. Those were the only questions we received today. That concludes our webinar for today. Thank you, Cheryl and Adrian. As a reminder, the on-demand version of this event will be available shortly. On behalf of Varnish and 451 Research, thank you for attending and have a great day.
Thank you, and thank you for coming.